All right, first question. What was the initial goal of this study, and does it have a conservation impact?
Really good question. It's interesting because I think the kind of initial idea for this study was very much motivated by some basic science. And I'm a firm believer that basic science is what we need for conservation in general. We don't know the things we don't know. So this started with the really basic question, I think, of, how can we interpret killer whale vocals? And the first kind of port of call for that for me is, well, you line up behavior, what the whales do, and what they say. As we kind of got into that, we realized that this fills a gap, I think, right? Which is, we have all of these listening stations along the coast that have been really useful in telling us where the whales go, right? But what we found in the Salish Sea, where we actually have direct observation, is that just because whales are in a location doesn't mean they're using it for foraging or socializing. They have specific places that they like to forage in, specific places they like to socialize in. So I think that was a big impetus for this particular project is, let's make this behavior acoustics link, both because it's scientifically interesting.
And it's just cool.
It's so cool. But also because we want to know not just, they spend X number of days a year in this particular area off the Oregon coast. We want to know, what are they doing out there, and are there specific places where we're not observing them that we really should be targeting for conservation action?
So the initial goal, I think, is can we link specific calls to specific behaviors? Mm-hmm. And if we can, then we can use acoustics only in other locations to help identify where some of those behaviors are occurring.
Okay, can you walk through the process of how you analyze the data? How are audio and video annotated? What software do you use? How do you sync everything? Do you want to start with the audio side of things?
Yeah, so I am listening to the recordings in Raven Pro. And when we're recording in the field, every hydrophone goes into its own channel, so I can listen to a single channel or kind of a merged version of all of the audio streams together. And I am manually listening to the recordings and annotating call types, also noting things like whistles or other interesting acoustic events like potential fish crunches and things like that, and kind of drawing a box around the visual spectrogram of those sounds to mark when they're occurring.
Yeah, and then on the video side, we typically use a program called Boris, which lets us build an ethogram of behaviors we're interested in coding and a list of potential individuals who do those behaviors. And the main things we're coding are behavior state in each observation. So these are the really classic, foraging, resting, socializing, traveling. In addition to specific behavioral events like nursing, prey capture, prey sharing, and some other social behaviors as well.
So in the field, we are making sure everything is synced. Like for our first gear deployment of the day, we do kind of the equivalent of a clap sync to make sure both the drone, the hydrophones, the kind of our positioning units are all synced to one another so that the timestamps can be matched up. But then there's the mathematical side of what do you do with those data streams when you get back?
Once Monika has marked all of the start times and the end times of these different calls, I then put that into R, which is a statistical coding language. From that, we do some math, some matrix algebra, and we estimate the bearing, the angle of arrival of that call. So say you have your 4 hydrophones. If it arrived at this one first, and then this one, and then this one, and then this one, with particular delays, we can estimate that it came from this direction. Now that tells us what direction relative to the hydrophone array, but the hydrophone array is deployed from a boat, and the boat is moving even though we're shut off, it's moving with tide and wind, so we need to know where the boat was and what direction it was pointed. We have 2 more instruments to do that. We have a very high precision GPS mounted on the boat, and we also have what's called an IMU, an inertial measurement unit, which has a magnetometer, it has an accelerometer, it has a gyroscope, and we can use all of that information to estimate the boat and therefore the array's position and orientation during the recording.
So what's amazing is that It's working.
It's working. It works. So, we can localize pretty accurately. On a clear day, if the calls aren't overlapping, we can localize to some degree basically every call we get.
Was the drone hydrophone work on Big's killer whales planned, and do you intend to do more of it?
Planned might be a strong word.
The focus of the study initially was definitely on southern residents, in part because of that conservation need. Our funding was focused on southern residents, but as with most of the work that's being done on the southern resident killer whales, the Big's killer whales are here and provide an opportunistic kind of comparative population for a lot of this work. It's also just fundamentally interesting because we don't know very much at all about Big's killer whale acoustics. So we certainly knew it was a possibility. We were going to be going out in the field if the southern residents weren't there and Big's killer whales were, just to kind of see what we could do. And I think even that brief, those brief moments that we had were enough to make us want to do some more targeted field work on Big's killer whales in the upcoming years, hopefully.
Yeah, pending logistics and funding. But it's really interesting. I think we're already kind of thinking through, the implications of the few days we did have in the field and what we heard, and I think more so what we didn't hear for a lot of those days. And I'm glad we did. It was some really interesting days out there on the water, and yeah, I'd love to do more of that work. Okay, do you anticipate results will be different by pod and or matriline? If so, will this affect the sample sizes needed? That is a great question.
That's a really good question. I think, well, certainly within the southern resident killer whales, the different pods have different dialects and are making different vocalizations. There are some calls that are shared among J's, K's, and L's, so there's a possibility that they're using some calls for the same purpose. But it's also very likely, I think, that each pod is going to have something specific going on with the unique call types that they use. So I think having a bunch of data with J-pod and, 1 or 2 days with L-pod, it would be really hard to draw any conclusions about L-pod.
You're absolutely going to need those social identities in the model, and it does affect sample size. I think we've been lucky over both field seasons in that we had encounters with members of all three pods in both field seasons. At least for now, our estimates and our predictive power in J-pod is going to be better than our predictive power in K and L-pod because we have recordings from J-pod over more days, over more contexts, and just more calls, period.
And while the initial goal of this research is kind of to inform the passive acoustic monitoring efforts of southern residents, I think this question really gets at a lot of the other types of inquiries that this research could lead to. I think we're both really interested in the social context of vocal behavior and how might the presence of K-pod influence the calls J-pod is making and things like that. And that might very well be a route we want to explore in future research.
Yeah, for sure.
Are you noticing any emerging patterns in the data?
I mean, one thing I think is really interesting is just how often, a pod on their own, even when spread out and you'd think they'd need to communicate with one another, can just be totally silent. That I found really interesting. I mean, we kind of had some idea that they might be quiet a lot of the time, but J-pod spread out in the impsession triangle, when they're foraging, we can do a 30-minute set and hear a call or two maybe and some clicks, which I find really interesting.
Yeah, it's hard to link in the field kind of what we're hearing to what we're seeing because in real time we're not localizing the calls, we're hearing everything that's going on from all of the whales, and so it's hard to make those connections, which is why we need some of this fancier math to come in and try and correlate some of these things for us. So I don't think we have any insights yet. It'll take kind of the official data analysis to really get that sense. But on the Big's killer whale front, one thing that was interesting to me was the kind of the lore in the region is that, they vocalize after a hunt when they're prey sharing. And gosh, they're not always vocal either, are they?
No.
We got 4 or 5 hunts really over the course of the season down there and complete silence in the prey sharing. And so the context of when vocalizations occur or don't occur, I think will be really interesting in both ecotypes.
And could have in and of themselves some major conservation implications, right? So, like I said, we're building these ideas of where the whales are spending time based on where they're detected on the hydrophones. If there are behavior states, potentially important ones like foraging, where they're largely being quiet except for these echolocation clicks, which you might not hear depending on the orientation of the whale, and you might not be able to assign to ecotype. That presents some possibilities for some real holes in our understanding of not just where the whales are spending time, but where they're foraging. So I think...
So if you have hydrophones permanently deployed somewhere and you're not hearing the whales, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not there.
Exactly. It doesn't even mean... It's not only it does not mean they're not there, they could be using that area as a major foraging spot, and you might just be hearing clicks that you're not assigning to any particular killer whale ecotype. So it has some important implications, I think. But like Monika said, the actual nitty gritty is only going to come once we finished scoring the good stuff. Once we finish scoring all the drone video, scoring all the hydrophone recordings, and actually doing the math to link them up.